You're listening to Good Shepherd Catholic Radio, Eucharistic Revival Podcast. My guests today are Dr. Robert Moore-Jumonville, Dr. Kimberly Moore-Jumonville, and their daughter, Annesley Anderson. Welcome to all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's so much we can talk about with the Robert Moore-Jumonville family. And I think, Robert, you're going to get us going and just kind of give us a little bit an overview of the kind of the family conversion story.
Yeah, so it's been interesting, and this is on Kimberly's side of the family, really. I grew up a pagan. I do have some siblings who are believers, Protestant believers, but Kimberly's family in total, I mean, completely was religious and devout. And this comes like several generations. So it's her father and then his father were both pastors. And her father also taught at Spring Arbor University, but was a Nazarene minister, and he preached just about every Sunday of his life, someplace, right? So he was just a wonderful mentor for us, and not just for us as in his children and their spouses, but the grandkids, I think everybody. And so here is that's the soil that we grew up in.
Yeah.
Now, Kimberly's oldest brother, his oldest son, Cameron, whom you've met.
Yes.
Cameron was the first in the family to convert, to be received into the Catholic Church. And I don't know if I've ever completely heard that story of why, but he was interested. He'd been exposed to it at Baylor, or was it? It was previous to.
It was liturgy before then.
Okay.
He was in a liturgical church in Kansas City. They went to a Lutheran church,
Okay.
and he loved the liturgy. And then he participated with you and me, and when Nancy was little, in a liturgical service that we did here in at the Free Methodist Church that was engaging several people from the community who participated. And most of those people have become Catholic or Orthodox. But
Really?
Cameron went on from there. He graduated from college and started pursuing Roman Catholic initiation as an adult.
And that was when he was just back
Next
home
year.
in Kansas, wasn't it? It was prior to him going to grad school.
It was prior to Baylor.
Yeah. So he was the first, and that must have been in the early 2000s.
2006 is when he graduated, so it would have been that 2006, 2007.
Okay.
So Cameron was the first.
Cameron was the first, and then you guys can help me with the order, but it was, next would have been his brother Cody, then his sister Jenny, then
His mother, Linda.
I think Linda and I were the same year.
So, and you were 2014.
16.
2016, okay.
Yep.
And then Annesley's husband, Brevin, and Kimberly were the same year. That was 2018. Raj came in somewhere. Anyway, so now and then I came in 2019. There are several others, Royal. So there's probably 10 at least now who've converted.
Yeah, I think more than that.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
More than 10.
It's hard for us to keep count.
Well, and what I'd love you to chat a little bit about is, to what degree was it kind of like a family thing where, the domino was like one converts and then he talks to, whoever, and then it's just, or to what degree were these kind of separate experiences that people were going on? Or was it really, you were just kind of, the family was kind of converting each other as you talked about it?
I don't think that, I would think of it more as individual.
I think it was individual, but I think it was also just the exposure.
Yeah.
Because it was Cameron becoming Catholic was the first I had really come to think about Catholicism at all in any way. So I think it was just hearing about, oh, he did that. Interesting. Then it was on my radar. And then from there, it was an individual experience for me. But I think a lot of it was just the awareness.
Yes. And I think, so it's interesting that, so once it was Cameron, Cody, and Jenny, and maybe say like there were 4 in that family, then it made it easier to think, well, this is something that's like normalized. But I mean, because we all had a draw to it, I think, individually. But it was partly this sense that Kimberly's father was still alive at the time, while some of these early conversions were going on. And he was very appreciative. Really, he's the one who actually exposed us to John Paul II, right?
He gave us the biography, George Weigel's biography, Witness to Hope.
Really?
And on audio. And so Robert and I listened to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's long. It's hours.
Oh, yeah.
And he loved John Paul II.
He really did appreciate John Paul II. And the dignity of persons was something my father talked about as a philosophy professor and a theologian. Talked about it all my life. And I just sort of imbibed that understanding, which John Paul II really develops as you know, from the Catholic perspective. Is just.
And so I don't know how many of our listeners know Protestantism well, but the Nazarene Church is a holiness church. It's an offshoot from Wesleyanism. John Wesley is teaching, and it really focuses a lot on sanctification, on so really kind of purity of heart and just a proper prayer life and attitude toward religion, a piousness. And so I think that holiness is something that Dad, Daryl Moore, saw in the Catholic Church. And that's something that I think we've all noticed, we've all been drawn to.
Well, to me, as a cradle Catholic, that's just so fascinating because I typically think, Protestants generally, I mean, cause I can, it's easy to kind of group Protestants into basically kind of into a stereotype.
Yeah.
And I think, they must just really have a hard time with being a Catholic, because some really do. But to hear that your father, who was a pastor, actually embraced the teaching of John Paul II and would give it to you, that just really, that's powerful for me to hear that.
Yeah.
Chesterton was also one of the big factors early on, because Dad, you always loved Chesterton and went to the Chesterton Conference.
Right.
And I grew up going to the Chesterton Conference as a Protestant and reading him, and that was part of Cameron's story as well.
So that is fun too, because that's a part of my story that I'd forgotten, Nancy, and I wouldn't have remembered, but and I should have, because I went to the American Chesterton Society annual conference for 20 years in a row. So starting in from 2000 to 2020, every year, it's all over the country. And Dale Alquist, president of the American Chesterton Societies, spent many a night in our house, visiting here and teaching in the area, teaching at the university. And my Chesterton friends, the Chestertonians, were so subtle, dogged, patient as evangelists, because they were always like, so when are you gonna convert, brother? And they were always tongue in cheek and stuff like that too. But they were always, and I know that they were praying for me. But yeah, that exposure to a man like Chesterton, who's like this wonderful wit, very kind person, just a person who had friendships that were, people just loved him because he was a good man. And just such a common person too, just like so down to earth, and to have him just, have a love of Mary and love of the Catholic Church that was influential.
I think we had our family reunion at the Chesterton Conference one year.
Yeah, we did. Down in Kansas.
Really?
Yeah, we did.
Were any of us Catholic then?
Certainly, Cameron, Cody, and Jenny.
And Cody.
Yeah.
Okay.
We were on the way.
Yeah. We were.
See, again, it's just so neat to hear how not only JP2, but GK Chesterton, who's kind of a personal hero, as you guys know, our cat is actually named Chesterton, because I have been a fan of his, mostly because of the Father Brown stories for way back. But I've always had a little bit of an issue with, he just kind of overdoes paradox in my mind. But but generally speaking, I love what he writes. But you're right, he's such he just presents the faith in such a positive. Really, what's best about being Catholic? This idea that we drink wine, we smoke. There's a sense of just kind of joy and fun.
Yes,
and that
Cameron, when he was graduated from college, I said, Cameron, give me a good quote for your graduation cake. And he said, "The aim of life is appreciation." Chesterton.
Yeah,
give me a good Chesterton quote. And he just right out, short. quip.
Yeah.
The brevity
I can
is
finish
the
the
soul
quote
of
for
wit.
you. The aim of life is appreciation. There is no point in not appreciating things, and there's no point in having more of them if you have less appreciation of them.
Oh! And of course, we get to paradox, which he always does. Anyway, how these things which seem to be different are really the same.
Yeah.
Or anyway.
Yeah. He did his senior thesis at the undergraduate level on Chesterton, and Dale Alquist came to the defense.
Wow.
He was the main reader.
Yeah. So
that is so cool.
That's great, yeah.
So both JP2 and Chesterton really seem to be kind of like the intellectual Catholic theologians who really had an influence on your family.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. That's really great to hear. Okay, so now I would love to kind of hear your personal conversion stories, and especially with a little bit of a focus on the Eucharist and kind of how that affected and the Catholic teaching on that was instrumental or significant in your lives.
Sure.
So Annesley was first. So
yes, I was the first one to go first. So it was Cameron who first sort of introduced the idea of Catholicism as a possibility to me. I knew what it was before then, but I never would have given it much thought. So when Cameron became Catholic, I was like, curious. All right. Don't know why he did that, but okay. And then he recommended a book to me, Kristen Lavren's Daughter, which is a classic Catholic novel, very long, but highly recommend. And what it revealed to me was the idea of the sacramental life.
Yeah.
Because it takes place in medieval Norway. The whole country is very, very Catholic, and they're just steeped in sacrament, in that way of life. And that was very appealing to me. The idea that it's through the physical world and through our bodies that we encounter the spiritual world, that there are these concrete realities expressed in the sacraments in a physical way that we participate in, that are bigger than us, but that are efficacious to us, but that we can be a part of them. And there's grace that God gives to us through those, regardless of how we feel. Because a lot of my Protestant faith before that had been individual. It had been in my head. It had been, how am I experiencing what's happening right now? And the sacraments made a lot of things more concrete to me, I think. And of course, the Eucharist is the primary sacrament, the one that they all go to and come out of. So as soon as I sort of started to think about this idea of the real presence and transubstantiation, I thought it was amazing. I was like, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. Why haven't I heard about this before? And I realized that if that were true, and I wasn't sure if it was or not yet, but if it were true that Jesus is really, truly present in the Eucharist, in the consecration, in the Catholic Church, that I had to become Catholic, that there wasn't an alternative there, that if that were real, then that had to be where I went, because how could I not want that? So I did a lot of reading after that and exploration, and came to believe, yes, that is true. That's what the early church taught. That's what the church has always taught, that Jesus is really, truly present in the Eucharist. And so that was it. It was quite easy for me to become Catholic, a lot because of the Eucharist and the idea of transubstantiation. And wow. So Annesley, at that point you were a college student? Yes. Yep. I was a freshman in college. I had moved to Seattle from a small town in the Midwest. I moved to Seattle, and all of my friends were sort of doing the church hopping thing. I was at a Protestant university. Everybody was like, oh, I'm going to try this one, and I'm going to try this one. And I had gotten enough of Catholicism at that point to be interested. So I thought, I'm just going to try Mass. I'm going to go to Mass and see what it's like. And immediately I was just in awe that, wow, something's happening. I'm in the presence of something real and I'm participating in it. So even from that first time going to Mass, I think that was it. I was like, oh, yep, this is it.
Wow. And what's so neat for me to hear is, as someone who's gone to Mass since I can remember, as a cradle Catholic, it's so easy for me to take for granted when I go to Mass what's going on at the Mass. And thankfully, because of just what's going on in the church with the Eucharistic revival, I've been reading a lot about this, and it's really helped me deepen my appreciation. And what I so love hearing from you is, you as a non-Catholic could go to a Mass and just kind of experience some way God is really here. This is real, as opposed to just walking out and thinking, oh, that was kind of a waste of time, or what. Anyway, and I'm just curious. I mean, besides just saying that must be the Holy Spirit at work, what was it about the Mass that you think that was particularly kind of engaging for you?
I loved the participation, the kneeling, the standing, all of the responses. Obviously, my family had done a lot of liturgical-ish things growing up, so that naturally was appealing to me. But I think it was just very much more so manifest in the Mass. And I loved that. I loved feeling like I was a part of something that was bigger than me, that was really happening outside of me, that I could come into and become a part of, rather than sort of dealing with everything from an internal subjective perspective. I also got lucky. I think I went to St. James Cathedral in Seattle, which was just gorgeous. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful cathedral. Beautiful music. So it was also a very, very moving experience, just of beauty as well.
Yeah.
So I lucked out with the church that I picked to go to, but that was, it was a lot of things. Mm-hmm.
Great. And so you were in college, you went to Mass, and did you start like RCIA or something kind of in Seattle?
I did. It was my sophomore year, I believe. That freshman year, I thought about it some more, did a lot more reading, tried a couple of Protestant churches. And then by the end of my freshman year, I was ready to start to convert. So my sophomore year, I started RCIA. I went over to the University of Washington, had a Newman Center. It was great. So I went over there every Tuesday night for that year and did all the classes and loved it. It was run by the Dominicans, so that was also really fun.
Yeah. And you had mentioned that you had done a lot of reading. Were there any books particularly that made a difference for you?
Had we read When the Church Was Young?
Yeah, that was one of them. When the Church Was Young was one of the big ones, talking about how all of these practices in the Catholic Church, they have their roots right there at the very beginning. That was a big one. Love and Salt was another one. It's a book of letters between two Catholic women who are just sort of going through regular lives with their ups and downs and writing letters back and forth to each other about their experience of their faith. And that was a really moving one to me. And then I think several Chesterton books too, probably. Probably, definitely. Orthodoxy, and then The Catholic Church and Conversion by Chesterton was...
Wow, that's great. So Chesterton really has had an influence in your family.
Really has.
In a pretty significant way.
We should probably be praying to him.
Yeah. Well, I think that's in process. So.
It is process,
And I'm curious, as mom and dad back here, in Michigan, while your daughter's sharing all this, obviously you were very open to, because of your exposure to it. What were you thinking about while she was kind of sharing what Annesley was going through?
Well, I think initially I was just super proud that she would be able to be independent enough to think for herself and to make that kind of decision. And, that it was a decision that already had, she'd seen in the family with Cameron becoming a Catholic, just that realizing too that that's kind of the direction that we'd sort of been exploring as all of us as a family. So,
I was impressed with what it required of her to get to the Catholic Church. I think it was the Newman Center was at University of Washington where she was going, but she lived up on Queen Anne Hill, so she had to take 2 buses or walk. It was 3 miles, I think, something like that. Is that right? Anyway, she made all that effort to get there every week, and she was doing it by herself. And so this is a city. It's an urban. And so I just thought she's very serious about this. It's not just something she's dallying with or considering, but she's committed enough to do this already. And Robert and I have had a spiritual director since early 2000s, maybe. No, I started with him 2008. But anyway, he was Catholic. Of course, spiritual direction comes from that tradition. But the church fathers and all of that history is so powerful for me, of the 2,000 years of thinking and theology that's gone into the worship and the theology of the church. But anyway, I was very drawn to the Catholic worship. And then when Annesley actually put it to, her feet and her heart and her head, I was like, oh, I'm going there too. So it was really important that Annesley had become Catholic. Cameron, yes, but then my daughter. Once my daughter started in, I was in. Everything came together for me. I knew I was on that road, I suppose, but it really confirmed for me that, yes, this is what I am going to do.
Well, and Annesley, before we move on to one of your mom or dad talking about their experience, I would love, you had mentioned obviously the Newman Center being significant. Were there relationships there? And you've talked about some of the books you've read and the beautiful church and just the beauty of the Mass. But the other piece that I am guessing, and I want to kind of hear from you, were there relationships there at the Newman Center that with peers, with other that were kind of significant in terms of, as you were or not as you were making this journey?
Yeah, there were everybody at the Newman Center there was just lovely. It was a really joyful community, and they were all just so excited to be at RCIA. There were lots and lots of people who would volunteer to be small group leaders and everything. That was the Dominican priests, the two of them that would head it up, but there were all kinds of other people who were involved as well. So being a part of that and that energy was really fun. And there were a couple of particular people in my small group that I got put in who I really connected with and who were great models for me. One of them ended up becoming my sponsor. She was a grad student in physics at the University of Washington, and she was just volunteering because she enjoyed doing it. So,
well, that's great. So, well, there's so much there that it's just nice to hear because, as a cradle Catholic, getting the perspective of those who kind of experience the beauty of the Eucharist, the beauty of the Mass, and kind of theologically, really, because I never went through that process, of really thinking about, is this really true? I always have just kind of, because I've done it since I was a kid, I've just kind of always accepted it. And I'm personally quite inspired to hear how you, who really had a whole theology apart from being a Catholic, were able to just kind of study this, think about this, understand it, and really embrace it. It's frankly pretty inspiring to me. Okay. So Kimberly, should we go to Kimberly next?
She was next.
You were next.
I was next. The catalyst for my confirmation in 2018 was Annesley and Brevin's announcement of their engagement. They were going to get married the summer of 2018, which gave me enough time to enter OCIA and become,
which was RCIA.
Which was RCIA then, Roman Catholic Initiation for Adults, and to get started in the process of being confirmed. So it was really the wedding that was moving me toward it, because I wanted to take Eucharist at their celebration of their union. Yeah. Because marriage is a sacrament in the church, but it is this beautiful coming together of two people in at every level of life to be one. And that's our longing, to completely know and be known by someone else. Well, that reflects Christ in the Eucharist, what Christ is doing for us there. And I knew I want to go and support them, celebrate their union, but also actually physically, viscerally participate in Eucharist myself during their wedding. I'm going to cry again because I wanted to be present at every level of my being to support them. Yeah. So that was just a highlight for me. And I think we love weddings because each new union of each new couple offers us hope. It's like we love to see this ideal being enacted, brought to fruition again. Each couple coming together, and the Catholic Mass does that so beautifully because it emphasizes that the wholeness of the intimacy is communing with one another in the soul, in the body, and in the mind of the spirit. And so that was central to Jesus giving himself, body, blood, soul, and divinity to us in complete unity, like the husband and wife are invited to give themselves completely to each other. That experience of intimacy helps us know what God wants, what he desires for us is, he wants to marry us. He wants to come into us. And with the Eucharist being the real presence of Jesus, he does come into us. He wants to share complete oneness with us. God gives himself to us completely when we take the Eucharist. Jesus, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, have you felt a lack before that? Because this is something that you were longing for.
I sensed when I longed to take Eucharist at the wedding and become Catholic, I sensed what Annesley mentioned, that Catholics understand how the body participates in salvation. And I don't know that I understood completely what was happening in Eucharist. I'm not sure I still do. It's got it goes on and on and on. It's so wonderful, the depths of it. But I did sense that the body participates, and Jesus is in that. That is Jesus' real body and blood. And yes, I did sense a lack. I need this. I need Christ in me, because that Eucharist experience, it's nourishing. It actually is spiritually nourishing, and I need it. God preserves and sustains us through the creation, but most specifically through taking the Eucharist. So I did feel a lack.
Something that you've mentioned before that reminded me of when Annesley had said sacramental. You said sacramental theology or something like that.
Christian Laverin's daughter.
Yeah, through the
sacramental life.
Yeah, the sacramental life. And I was thinking, you've often talked about the order of life that Catholics have, which is, I mean, in that sense that life is sacramental, like with the Middle Ages and Christian Laverin's daughter, there are pilgrimages. There is the liturgical year. There's, Christmas is coming back again. There's the Lent, and then there's the daily office. There are all of these different components that we become a part of. We become part of that greater stream.
That's what I think of as holiness of heart and life is our goal. And John Wesley promoted that, and I understood that. But the Catholic order of life gives us a practice every day. There are the lectionary readings. There are the prayers. There is the feast day for that day, or the fast day for that day. There are the saints, and we participate in the whole communion of saints. There is all the readings by the church fathers and mothers that we get to participate in are so enriching. And the whole 2,000 years of the magisterium, all of the doctors of the church and everything that they contribute to understanding and interpreting the scriptures and creating the liturgical, calendar, everything that they're about.
And the crux of that order of life is the Mass and the Eucharist. That's what it all comes back to.
Yep.
Yeah.
And circles around.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yes.
The weekly.
Yeah.
The weekly cycle of Sabbath.
Yeah.
Mass. Yeah.
So that.
Or daily Mass, which I've come to discover is something. It's a thing.
It's a thing. Yes.
So from the self-giving invitation of the wedding to the husband and wife, we have this opportunity to completely pour ourselves out for each other, like Jesus poured himself out for us. Annesley and Brevin had chosen Psalm 34 for their psalm, and Annesley asked me to sing it. And it's taste and see that the Lord is good. And I didn't realize the extent to which that would be meaningful for me. I loved doing it at the time, and taste and see had so many different.
How's it go?
But
well, and what you both have talked a lot about is how the Catholic faith generally and the Eucharist specifically is this. It's the body and the spirit kind of coming together. The carnal, the real, the physical, and the spiritual. And I think that's one of the things I most love about being a Catholic is this sense that, like the sacraments, are so much. Yes, they're symbolic. They're a sign of grace, but they're also efficacious. They are that grace coming. And it's always, this physical thing and the spiritual thing are so intimately connected. And anyway, and that's why I think, as I've kind of grown in my appreciation for the Eucharist and how the Eucharist is so much a part of the idea of the incarnation, that God would choose to become as man. It only, and to take on our flesh, it would only kind of make sense. He would say, okay, I now need to leave you with my flesh to feed you forever spiritually. Yeah. And it's just because who we are in the flesh and who we are in the spirit are really united.
Yeah, they're not two different things.
If they're not, and one's not bad, and one's not, and some of the early heresies in the church, it's this wonderful kind of sanctification of all that is carnal in a certain way, that's fleshly and human.
It's re-sacramentalizing the human body.
Yeah, and that's what you're talking about, Annesley. The idea is the sacramental nature of it, that these sacraments are about spirit and physical coming together in these amazing ways.
Yeah. The sacraments are means of grace And that was something I was really looking forward to. 7 means of grace.
Yeah.
7 sacraments. Oh my goodness. And I get these all the time. And marriage is a sacrament.
Yes.
That's a whole different understanding of marriage. It's very different.
Yep.
Very different than marriage.
And that's powerful. That our goal as a spouse is our job, our vocation is to bring our spouse along to heaven.
Yes.
That's our main job.
Right. Is to be, in essence, an instrument of grace for our spouse. I mean,
that means I'm doing better than you are.
God knew that we needed it. He needed me to be pulled along by my husband. It's like, okay, get cracking, woman.
Oh, man. We need to get Brendan into this conversation. You have a lot to say about that. Okay, well, we're obviously going to have a lot. We can talk a lot more about that, Kimberly. But so, Robert, maybe your...
Yeah, so just to follow up with Annesley and Kimberly's story, when I knew that I could not be the first one. And partly it's because of the whole very devout Protestant tradition in Kimberly's family, and Kimberly being really central to her family, that if I did, it would be not just like, say, like an insult potentially to her or anything like that, but this sense that I was jumping ahead. And I wasn't willing to do it, and because I really wanted us to be able to worship together as family. And so when she made the decision, and I was actually surprised when she made the decision to do it that soon, and I understood exactly why when she did do it, but I just didn't anticipate it. Mm-hmm. And then so that allowed me to start thinking about it. And so that opened the door. It's like, it's not like I'm trying to do something apart from the family then.
Right.
So that was key. I think, so I was a Protestant minister, for 33 years. And 21 of those, I was pastoring a church. And, at different points, I had more of a pull towards things liturgical, towards, first of all, it was the Episcopalian church, because that was still Protestant, and Kimberly and I would visit Episcopalian churches. When we did this liturgical service, it was the Episcopalian liturgy. But we did this in a Protestant church, and we did vestments and we did incense, and we did everything except use real wine. Mm-hmm. And yet, there's always this kind of sneaking suspicion, and I think it was growing, that maybe Protestantism generally was kind of thin in terms of sacraments, and I think one of the real clinchers for me was I was teaching a class, and it was a period. It was around the same time we were doing the liturgical service. It was a class for seniors who were going to go straight into ministry. So these are Protestant kids who were going to go straight into pastoring a church, potentially. And so it was a class to try to prepare them to understand what the sacraments mean. So you could say it was like a class in sacramental theology. It was titled Theology and Practice of Ministry. And it was supposed to cover baptism, communion, weddings, funerals. Okay, so I'm leading this class, and it's about 12 in a class. And so I could, looking back on it, I could have predicted this, but I had no idea that this was what was going to happen. So we talk about baptism, and you get these stories. Oh, yeah, my cousin got, baptized in a bathtub, by his uncle. And, or we got baptized in a swimming pool, or we all got baptized in the lake, or that was my 3rd baptism. What? You can't be baptized 3 times. Well, the first 2, this didn't feel right, the first one I was too young, and then the second one I was in a bad mood, anyway. Right. It was like, wait a second, and so, trying to teach on what a proper theology of baptism implied. Well, then it was like, okay, I wonder if I'm going to see this same pattern with communion. Ding, 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 ding. Yep. It's like, how can you not take communion seriously? I know, donuts and Coke or whatever, right, just right. The kind of nobody's ordained, no ordination, not even a hint at an online degree. Just anybody can do it at any time, any place, for any reason. And then when it got to the marriage, it was interesting because then again, you get, my cousin, they did their wedding skydiving, or these destination weddings or whatever, up on top of the Empire State Building. Nothing to do with a church or any kind of liturgy. And so I asked them, I said, well, do you think by not taking the liturgy of the wedding and the ceremony seriously, that actually begins to erode the institution of marriage itself? And they were like, oh, it was like this aha experience. And so at the time in Protestant evangelical theology, there was this movement, and it came out of Wheaton College, called the Ancient Future Church. And it was like, we can be as modern as we want to be, but we're going to go and we're going to take some things that are kind of cool, like we'll have candles, or I don't know what, not like kneeling, but we'll do a processional, so there would be some kinds of ancient practices that you would smuggle into Protestant worship service they would start to do the liturgical year and all. And I can remember this was actually really important to my conversion, I think, is going to an Orthodox service, because we had a number of students who out of the liturgical service had converted to Orthodoxy. And one of these guys he was a ministerial candidate as a Protestant. He's now an Orthodox priest. But so I went to the baptism of his first son, his first child. And an Orthodox baptism is this incredible set of symbols that are ancient. And just as an example, the godparents have the child, and it's just dressed normally, I think. Or no, maybe it's dressed in white to start off with. But they do all these things, like they prayed around the font 7 times, and they do all of this. They spit at the devil at the door of the church, So there are all these.
Do you renounce the devil? Yes, we renounce the devil. Do you renounce the devil? Yes, we renounce the devil.
Yeah, and so and so actually we've just been to another one of these recently. And then at the very end, after the baby is baptized, the baby's dunked, and then dressed in white, and then they take it up into the Holy of Holies. Right, which is like they've got 3 doors in the Orthodox Church, the iconostasis, the icon screen. They take it up behind, and then the godparents come and they lay it on the altar. Oh my gosh, my heart was starting to break. This is like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I thought to myself, I have just been invited into something that has been going on forever. I didn't have any part of making, so no one thought this up, right. And what part could I actually borrow from this? What part do you tear out of the cloth and try to plant into a Protestant church and sort of say like, it has any kind of integrity? It's like this, it was just this woven. And so that it was like, I knew it at that point, it was either Orthodox or Catholic, but those are the options. And I actually wrote an article on this. I think one of the main reasons that I was becoming Catholic instead of Orthodox is just because I'm a Western person, and Orthodoxy is often very Eastern culturally. Mm-hmm. It's got that flavor, and I just couldn't do that. I'm just too much a fan of Western literature and art and music and all, But it also that's the direction my family was going. But, over and over again through my work as a minister, I kind of sort of felt like, is this kind of just faking it a little bit, because it's not, it's the sacramental realism. It's the sense that what you said earlier, that the symbol affects what it promises, right? It's an efficacious symbol. So it's something real.
Yeah.
So,
well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
It's fun.
Now, is there anything that any of you would like to say that I haven't asked about, or that we haven't had a chance to talk about, or have we covered pretty much everything you'd like to get in related to the Eucharist? I know there are so many other topics we could talk about, but I want to make sure we don't miss that. We don't end and you say, oh shoot, I really wanted to talk about whatever.
Yeah. I have one final thought that I can add. This sort of, I think both Mom and I in our stories, and maybe Dad, a little bit of you too, but we felt this need, this hunger for the Eucharist before we became Catholic.
Yeah.
And I think for me, once I learned about that doctrine, I had this great sense of like, oh, I really hope that's true. Now I got to go. I'm going to go figure out if I believe it, that it is true. And I've concluded, yes, it is. But before I even had decided that, I felt like this great sense of hope. Like I said, that I really hope that's true. And I think that reminds me of a C.S. Lewis quote, to go back to a very smart Protestant. He said, if we find in ourselves a desire which this world doesn't satisfy, the most probable reason is that we were made for another world, something like that. That every natural hunger that we experience has a corresponding food, right? We're hungry, there's food, we're thirsty, there's water, I'm tired, I can sleep. So I think the fact that we had this sense, as soon as we learned about the idea of the Eucharist, like, oh, I want that, I need that, I hope that that's true. I think that hunger in itself sort of speaks to the truth of it, that there's something in us that really deeply recognizes that as something that we need and want, and that sort of reveals its truth.
Yeah. Why wouldn't it be there? Right.
Yeah. That's a great way to conclude. So thanks, Annesley, for that. And thanks to our listeners. You're listening to Good Shepherd Catholic Radio, Eucharistic Revival Podcast.